The Earned Stripes Act. Why Congress should live by the same rules it writes for the troops. By Mike Beaskey. At Beaskey Mike 22802. Community, Beaskey's classroom. Let me tell you what it costs to serve. A few years back, I drove 300 miles, one way. Got to the field on a Friday night, set up in the dark with a sapper engineer unit, did my job for 3 days, and drove 300 miles home on a Sunday. I did not see my 4 kids for the better part of a week. I put serious miles on my car. I burned gas. I ate terrible food in the field that I would not serve my beehives. You know what my net pay was for that weekend drill? 0. Not close to 0, not low, 0. Here is the math, and I promise I teach physics so I can do math. I received my drill pay. I paid income tax on that drill pay. Then, the Army took back an amount equal to that drill pay because of my VA disability rating. So not only did I net nothing, I actually lost money on that weekend. Gas, wear and tear, meals all coming out of my teacher's salary. 3 days away from my kids for negative compensation. I am not asking for sympathy. I chose this. I would choose it again. But I want you to understand what service actually costs, because the people voting on veterans benefits, military pay, and whether to pass the Major Richard Starr Act, SAMDT. 4,056 have never once had that experience, and they never will. So today, allow me to propose a modest remedy. What the Earned Stripes Act would do. Here is the concept. It is not complicated. The people who write the laws governing military service should live under the same economic conditions as the people serving. Not symbolically, literally. Under the Earned Stripes Act, members of the House of Representatives would be compensated at the same base pay rate as an E7, Sergeant First Class, Gunnery Sergeant, Chief Petty Officer, with the equivalent number of years of federal service. That is the senior NCO backbone of the American military, the people who actually run the institution. Seems like a reasonable baseline for the people who claim to run the country. Senators would be compensated at the same rate as an O3, captain or lieutenant, depending on branch, with equivalent years of service. An O3 is a mid-grade commissioned officer, competent, experienced, responsible, still has to answer to someone. Perfect. Both chambers would receive the same health insurance options available to active duty service members. Want TRICARE? Great. Pay your TRICARE premiums. Want VA care? You can get it at the care level, corresponding to a 50% service-connected disability rating. Not the disability pay, just the access to that level of care. And before any of my colleagues on the left start having a meltdown about healthcare as a human right, relax. They still get healthcare. The same healthcare the people they vote on get. I fail to see the injustice. No double dipping. That is what they call it. I do not think it is. But as long as they think it is, they are affected by it too. If a member of Congress is simultaneously collecting any federal retirement or any federal disability pay, they lose $1 of congressional salary for every dollar of retirement and disability combined. Sound familiar? It should. That is the same deduction that disabled reservists get until they are discharged. That is exactly what they do to my fellow combat wounded veterans right now. Through the concurrent receipt, offset the Major Richard Starr Act, HR 2102, S 1032, SAMDT. 4056 has been trying to fix for years, while Senator Roger Wicker sits on it like a goose on a golden egg that he personally laid but refuses to let hatch. And yes, I said that with my whole chest. The legal code. Yes, UCMJ equivalent. I am not joking. Congress would operate under a legal code, mirroring the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Congressional misconduct, dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming all prosecuted via the military court-martial process, adapted for civilian public servants. Think that sounds extreme? Let me ask you something. What happens to a soldier who lies to a superior officer? What happens to a medic who abandons a patient? What happens to an NCO who steals from the unit fund? Court-martial, career over, criminal record, no pension. What happens to a senator who lies to the American people, abandons his constituents, and votes against a bill he personally co-sponsored, the Major Richard Starr Act, because it is politically inconvenient? He gets reelected and goes on television to complain about spending. Quinn's Law has shown is relevant here. Liberalism always generates the exact opposite of its stated intent. Congress claims to honor veterans while structuring every incentive in its own legal framework to face zero accountability for failing them. Under a UCMJ equivalent code, dereliction of duty would mean something again. TSP in retirement, just like the Army. Congress would enroll in the same thrift savings plan and blended retirement system available to active duty service members. No special pension. No special post-service payout that nobody in uniform could ever qualify for. You serve, you contribute, you get the same retirement vehicle everyone else gets. If the BRS is good enough for the 2 1-year old private who signed up in 2019. It is good enough for the 8-year-old senator who has been serving since the Clinton administration. One more rule, and this is the part that personally hits me the hardest. If a member of Congress is collecting congressional salary and federal retirement and federal disability simultaneously, they lose $2 of salary for every dollar they collect in retirement or disability combined, one from pay and one from the lesser of the other two. Just like I lose pay when drill is offset against my disability rating. If the rule is good enough for the veteran who carried a rifle, it is good enough for the politician who carried a briefcase. Why this actually matters beyond the obvious. I want you to think about something for a minute. Right now, there are approximately 54,000 combat wounded, medically retired veterans who are losing between $1,200 and $1,900 per month because of the concurrent receipt offset the wounded veteran tax. The Major Richard Starr Act would end that theft. The CBO certified the cost at $9.75 billion over 10 years. Less than $1 billion per year for 54,000 people who lost limbs, lungs, and years of their lives in service to this nation. Senator Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a man who has never deployed in combat and whose military background was as an Air Force JAG lawyer, invented a $70 billion cost figure that NOCBO analysis has ever produced and used that fiction to block the bill. The day after blocking MRSA, Wicker voted for a $924.7 billion defense bill. Let that one land. He cannot find $975 million per year for combat wounded veterans. He had no trouble finding $924.7 billion for everything else. Quinn's Law #6 applies here with stunning precision. Facts are the enemy of liberalism, and apparently of certain Republicans who have learned to borrow their rhetorical tricks. Now, ask yourself this. If Senator Wicker's salary, healthcare, and retirement were directly tied to military pay scales, if his family's financial security were determined by the same math he applies to the veterans he claims to champion, do you think he would still be manufacturing fictional cost estimates to avoid a less than $1 billion a year bill? I will give you a moment to think. Yeah, me neither. The part where I get personal. I am a medically retired Army combat medic, 23 years. I deployed to Iraq. While I was there, I helped open a school, a fire station, and a hospital. I personally escorted girls to school so they would not be murdered for wanting an education. I came home, went back to college, became a civilian paramedic in Cleveland doing 12-hour overnight shifts, then drove straight to class the next morning, then did it again. I eventually became a high school anatomy and physics teacher. I wrote the textbooks for both subjects in a high-need career tech district where every single student qualifies for free lunch. I support a family of 6 on a teacher's salary, and the government takes part of my retirement every single month because of the concurrent receipt offset that the Major Richard Starr Act would fix a bill that has been sitting in Congress for years with 76 Senate co-sponsors and 300 plus House co-sponsors and one man blocking it. I drove 300 miles to do my duty and came home with less money than I left with. I just want Congress to have a tiny fractional taste of what that feels like. The Earned Stripes Act will not pass. I know that. I teach science, not fantasy. But the conversation it forces about what service actually costs, about why the people who vote on military compensation should understand it from the inside, that conversation is worth having. Loudly, repeatedly, until someone is embarrassed enough to act. The bottom line, if Congress truly believes that military pay and benefits are generous enough for the men and women who serve, then surely those pay and benefits are generous enough for the men and women who write the laws governing those who serve. If they are not generous enough for Congress, then Congress should fix them for everyone. It is not a radical idea. It is a logical one, which is probably why nobody in Washington has thought of it. In the meantime, sign the petition for the Major Richard Starr Act. Real veterans are losing real money every single month while we wait. Major Richard Starr died in February 2021 without seeing this bill become law. His widow, Tanya Starr, advocated until she was gone too. They are not here to keep fighting. We are. But what do I know? I am only a medically retired combat medic, a science teacher, and a man who drove 600 miles round trip and came home with a negative paycheck who thinks the people writing the rules should have to live under them.